Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. St. Louis Public Radio reporter Ryan Delaney usually covers a beat close to home, but it recently took him to Africa. The trip was partly personal, but also professional, as it gave him the chance to follow up on a story he filed in July about some African-born local students returning to their roots. Ryan joins me in studio to talk about their journey and his. Welcome, Ryan. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Don.
We had a not very good connection the last time we tried to talk when you were in Uganda. So let's backtrack a little bit and remind us of the story that you were pursuing on this trip.
Sure. I met up for a few days in Kenya with a group of teenagers who were all born in Kenya and have since emigrated to the St. Louis area, primarily North St. Louis County, and went back to do a volunteer service trip as part of a capstone project in a mentorship and leadership program that they're all in with some fellow immigrants.
Was this their first trip back since emigrating?
Yes, for this group. There was one student who I did speak with in July, but very last minute was unable to go on the trip. So this would have been her second time back. But for the rest of these kids, for the most part, yes. Two of them moved when they were about 13 or so, one only about a year and a half ago, another when he was 4, and I should say it went back when he was 10. So the first time as a teenager, at least. So it was a big deal, a mix of a homecoming and this volunteer trip.
It must have been quite emotional, I would think, going back after any extended period of time.
Yes, they were definitely happy to be there, happy to be using their Swahili more, and for some of them seeing a different part of the country. I met up with them a few days before they were going to have a few days to go see their families, so I missed those hugs and everything, but I'm sure that all went quite well, too.
And how were they received?
Very well. They started off in a southwestern part of Kenya where they volunteered and helped do some renovations at a hospital, and then traveled from there to a small, pretty remote village called Sakutik, which is about 2 hours off the main road that leads to Nairobi, the capital, which, if with an interstate system, probably only about an hour from the capital, but a mix of road qualities and traffic and things. So a few hours away with a small village with no running water, although electricity and cell phone service. School was on break, but got a chance to watch them interact with some older and some younger residents of this town.
I'm sure they got a lot of questions about what life was like in America.
They did. It was a mix of some little kids who were curious and actually a little surprised that they all grew up in the U.S., and then some older questions as well. And I posed that with one of them, Elizabeth Kamau, who's one of the more recent arrivals to the U.S. She was 16 when she moved here to St. Louis and is 18 now. And it's a tough question. There's kind of that television image of what America looks like, and then you actually move here and have to deal with immigrating and adjusting. And kind of here's what she says. She tells people who ask her that question.
Because they expect life is so easy there, but even though most people may seem it's easy, but it's not easy, so it's hard. Even though they might be curious about it, I tell them it's not all milk and honey.
Not all milk and honey. Well,
yeah, well put.
Yeah.
And I should say we were speaking in Kenya, so there, in this case, was here in the U.S. for us.
The work they were doing, it was all a good cause, as you have alluded to. They were doing some some projects that were very necessary in that part of the world.
Yeah, and this was all they're doing. They kind of came up with this idea and spent the better part of the last year fundraising and planning it. There were some students who were older than them who did a similar kind of service trip back home, and they saw that and said, well, we can do that too, and we want to try to do it better. So, yeah, they worked on these were very, as I mentioned earlier, remote parts of Kenya, and helped work on this hospital, and then add on 2 new classrooms to a small church school that's fairly new, and is trying to expand as kids age. So they built what would be the equivalent of 7th and 8th grade classrooms onto this school.
That's a great story. It's great to see that kind of giving back. I love to hear it.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what this was for them. These kids all count themselves incredibly lucky that their families, it's often said, won a green card. It's a lottery process that takes several years, usually at the easiest to get. And, they know how blessed they are that they have this opportunity to come to the U.S. and finish out their young years in education here. And it was a lot of wanting to make sure that kids back in Kenya have, the same educational opportunities or as close to it as they can help.
They brought, obviously, goodwill to Kenya in that part of the world. What do they bring home from that experience, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I should say they also brought suitcases full of pens and pencils and some soccer balls and medical supplies, too.
Just as important in many ways as anything else.
Yeah. What they were going to take away from this was actually kind of a theme of the conversation among themselves as well, that some of their chaperones kind of posed to them to think about each night at the end of the day. And it was interesting. I asked Sally Gisheru, who's also 18, about that, or started to, I should say, and then we got interrupted by a group of older women from the village who were walking by to help them build this school. We were kind of sitting off to the side a little away from all the hammering and sawing, and as is very accustomed in Kenya, these women all ignored my microphone and stopped to greet us. And I won't play that part of the tape because it's all in Kikuyu and Swahili. But
thank you.
And then Sally kind of got back to that, to answering my question.
So going back to things that I would take back, I'll probably take back like the hurt of the people here. Like I want to be like more the opening up to everybody. Like you don't say like these people like I won't talk to them or like I won't be open to them. So like the friendliness of the people is one of the things that I would take.
Yeah. All right, that's Sally.
Taking back the heart of the people there, and that was one thing. Just the community and the openness of people was something that was a big reminder for these kids.
You are our education reporter, so what did you learn during your time there?
I'd say I learned from them, and it's something that I've been thinking about too. Just the community aspect of Kenya, the openness. I will say in Kenya and Uganda as well, where I also was, you start every conversation with a greeting and asking people how they are, and it's sincere. Sometimes here in the U.S. it's kind of a pretty passive thing, but as Sally mentioned. The warmth that people express, and also the love of a hot shower. These are teenage kids who have gotten used to hot showers and electricity and internet and cell phone coverage, and they had to go without that for a few weeks, or at least intermittently. So it's always something I appreciate too after going back and forth.
Of course. I spent some time in Africa a few years back during the famine in Somalia, and even under the conditions that were just the most awful you can imagine, everybody always had a smile on their face and was always willing to greet you in the most friendly way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, your sister lives there, correct?
She does. 1 year this month. She lives in Uganda, so that was the personal part of this trip as well. But it was good to see her and
what does
my
she
nephew.
do?
She works for the 1 Acre Fund, which is a agriculture NGO, non-governmental organization. Mm-hmm. That the easiest way to summarize it would be microfinancing for small-scale farmers, so loaning seeds and education and other farming supplies, and then farmers at the end of the harvest season repay that with the additional profits.
Now, there's so much progressively going on in Africa these days, but there are still huge swaths of that continent that are living just this way, day to day, year to year, growth cycle to growth cycle.
Yes, the farming, and that was one of the conversations that I saw between one of these kids and an older man in Sakutik about how you get food and explaining the fact that you don't grow everything in your backyard or have sheep in your backyard, kind of the grocery stores. I would say that Africa economically and technologically is growing leaps and bounds, but it's not always evenly distributed at this point.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ryan Delaney, for your observations on all of this. Great to have you back, and a great trip, obviously.
Yes.
Very rewarding in many ways.
Thanks, Don.
That's Ryan Delaney, our education reporter. Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/STLOnAir. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.